Because we've made it very, very clear that steel is a vital industry, and we will not leave any stone unturned in our absolute determination to do everything we can, not just to keep rolling it and milling it and producing it, but actually making steel, and notably both at Scunthorpe and Port Talbot. And I'll put my hands up and say that there's a lot of stuff that perhaps we haven't talked about that we should talk about, and I can't talk about everything, but I want to make some points absolutely clear. First of all, we've been looking, a proper look, hard, long look, since October, led by Oliver Letwin, a group of ministers, including myself, at how we can, first of all, secure the making of steel at Scunthorpe, and then in more recent times, long before last week, how we can make sure we continue to make steel, blast steel, in Port Talbot. And that work's been going on. Unfortunately, I can't talk about the detail of it, because as you'll understand, a lot of this is incredibly commercially sensitive. So what happened back in September was that we had a steel summit, and the industry and the unions, and I just want to say something about the trade unions that represent steel workers, brilliant, skilled, remarkable men, as they usually are, and a few women as well. The trade unions throughout all of this have been outstanding, and I want to pay tribute in particular to the Communities Trade Union and their remarkable leader. So we've all worked together. And the industry quite rightly said to us, look, we've got 5 asks because we want a level playing field, some of which Chris has identified, like tariffs, for example. And we have delivered on 4 of those 5 asks. The only thing we've not delivered on is sorting out rates. Hopefully we might get there. But when it comes to tariffs, I can tell you that I was the minister who, in the face of the advice from my officials that we should vote against them, I said, no, we will vote in favour of tariffs on steel products and wire, and then later on rebar and a number of other products that we have done in conjunction with the European Union. And I agree with Chris, we're better off in the EU. This is a good example of it.
Including tariffs on Chinese steel?
Oh, yes, all the dumped steel. No, it wasn't. This is not true. We voted in favour. In fact, such was the shock in the EU commissioners that were sitting there, they went back to the UK delegation to check the vote. So we have done it twice. We did it in July, we did it in November. And as a result of that, the imports, for example, of rebar have now plummeted to 90%. So this dumped steel, notably from China, but from other countries as well, is already reducing because of the action that we have taken in conjunction with other countries. And that is what we're doing, and we'll continue, because we're determined that this country will carry on making steel in our brilliant steelworks with those excellent workers.
Ruth Lee.
The steel industry really is in difficulties, and I'm very surprised to hear Anna talking about tariffs in that particular way, because my understanding was that the European Union wanted to actually bring tariffs in of about 45%, of up to 45%, and the United Kingdom was one of those countries that blocked it.
No, that's not true.
Well, I'm afraid I read that in... Forgive me, I read that...
I'm the minister with responsibility for steel, and I've got the information, and I can promise you we've actually been arguing in favour of higher tariffs on some steel. I'm sorry, but I am the minister, and I know the instructions to my officials, I know the votes, and I know what we've done, Ruth. Forgive me. I think you're talking about the lesser duty rule, which is something different.
All right, Ruth Lee.
Am I allowed to continue?
Sorry.
Because I actually read that in a business committee report, and it was a business committee report that came out at the end of last year, so perhaps the report was wrong, but that's where I actually saw it. And it was on the government response to the steel crisis. But putting that aside about the tariffs, I don't think there's any doubt that China is selling very, very cheap steel at the moment, and it was exacerbated by the strong value of the pound. So the real steel industry had this enormous competitive disadvantage against the Chinese, added to which, of course, they do have extra expenses the Chinese don't, or indeed other countries in the European Union don't, in the sense that their energy costs are so much higher.
Can I drag you back to the question, which was about nationalising the steel industry?
Well, I was just very quickly to say this, that this was recognised by the government some time ago, but they took their time in actually bringing this energy package in. So, but the problem is we are where we are, and the steel industry's got all these problems, and I think the question really has to be now, how much of the steel industry is going to be realistically viable, economically viable? So let's see if the government can get somebody to buy Port Talbot. I think it's true that the Gupta's already bought a couple of the steel plants in Scotland, and there's another buyer who's going to buy Scunthorpe.
They're different.
But the big one, of course, is Port Talbot. And let's just see if they can actually sell that.
Absolutely right.
But they will have to provide sweeteners. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And you're talking about help on energy, your help on pensions, and probably help on environmental liabilities. But let's hope they can find somebody to buy.
The person in the front here, the woman here.
Why has the British government left it till so long to intervene within the steel market? If you've known that there's been a steel crisis for so long, why have you not intervened with Tata Sky before? Why, Tata Steel, sorry, why is it that you're doing it now?
Is that a criticism you would make, Douglas Carter?
I certainly think the government's been on the back foot on this, but let me be clear, I wouldn't support the nationalisation of steel, for the same reasons that I opposed every bailout of the banks. I don't think putting people like politicians in charge of an industry is going to make it any better. There are three reasons why I think steel production in this country is in the sorry state that it is, and three big failures on the part of the government. Now, let's be clear, Port Talbot makes good steel. It's world-class. It's a world-class product. But there are three things that make it virtually impossible for them to earn an honest living by producing what they produce. The first is it's a very intensive, energy-intensive industry. And being in the European Union means that the energy costs of producing steel in Port Talbot make it almost impossible to do so competitively. So I think we need to leave the European Union and reduce the cost of energy on our industry, and I think that would have a big help. Secondly, China has imposed, I think I'm right in saying, a 46% tariff on steel. Now, when the Chinese president visited this country, George Osborne was very, very keen to get them to sign up to a nuclear deal, which incidentally adds to the cost of our energy. I wonder if he used what clout we might have to try to negotiate and force China to be reasonable. I think perhaps because we're so fixated with trying to get Chinese investment in the nuclear sector, we're perhaps not using the leverage we should. But the other thing that hasn't been discussed is the £2 billion pension liability in Port Talbot. The price we pay of having Osborne Economics...
a bit more than two.
I think the pension deficit, the pension black hole, the unfunded liability, I believe I'm right in saying is £2 billion. If you look at what successive governments under, first of all, Gordon Brown and now George Osborne have done, they have reduced interest rates to virtually zero. The price we pay is we discover that pension funds haven't been able to keep up with their future liabilities. I think we're starting to see in Port Talbot a huge pension liability, and this is the price we pay of having a chancellor who believes that low interest rates alone can make us rich. It's the price we pay for Osborne Economics. It's a disaster.
The man there in spectacles, you've had your hand up quite a lot of the time tonight, and you haven't had a chance to speak.
A few points. Regards the pensions, right, that was because the legislation was changed about what pension companies could own. Most Canadian teachers' pension own our high-speed railway. The Canadian teachers' pension own huge assets in the UK.
Sorry, where are you? Let's stick to steel and Port Talbot.
The point that you made about the energy cost, if we pull out of the EU, then the energy cost would go down. We can't produce enough energy for what we use now. We buy most of it from Europe via a big pipe.
All right, and you, sir, in the jacket, blue shirt there. All right.
We spoke about slamming the stable door after the horse has bolted, but what about the rest of UK manufacturing? We've got a major skills shortage, so how are we encouraging people to study science, technology, engineering and maths?
All right, and let me go to Caroline Jones who asked the question. Caroline Jones, what do you think?
I agree with Ruth Lee about the EU. I've heard they're just imposing 9% tariff on the steel that's imported from China.
Can I just say something?
And America imposes a tariff of 244%.
Can I just say, though, that the point is, it's whether or not you get the right effect. And the effect is that we've seen, for example, on rebar, we've seen a reduction...
Rebar, you'll have to explain.
Reinforced bar. It goes mainly into concrete products. You often see it sticking up in bits of concrete. And it's particularly made, if I may say, in parts of Cardiff. But in any event, the point is, though, when we put those tariffs on, we saw a reduction of 99% of dump steel. But on energy prices, we're paying out tens of millions of pounds in compensation back. And from 2017, we will exempt all our energy-intensive industries from 2 of the 3 green taxes that have undoubtedly burdened. We've taken the action.
No way under the sun the government are considering nationalising steel. It's just, it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And it's a very different thing with the banks for them. I mean, the banks is like, you know, it's like, the banks is part of the ecosystem of exploitation, and it's based on debt. It's like the governments control citizens through debt, and international money controls governments through debt. So the banks were too big to fail. The steel workers, for all this kind of sort of rhetoric about how noble and how fine they are, all this patronising stuff, they don't give a toss. They'll,
It's not true, actually.
yes, it is true. Yes, yes, it is true. Do something about it.
It's not true.
So, sorry, Irvin Welsh not spoken very much on this. So you're saying that you think that they'll
I think it's a
be
big.
let go?
I think it's a big test for Labour in terms of their credentials. You know, they have to show how serious they are about. I mean, basically, it's like if the government nationalised the. If this government nationalised the steel, it's basically the beginning of the end of the neoliberal project. It can't be allowed to happen under this government.
Okay.
It's a big test for Labour. It's a big test for Corbyn. Will they have the gumption to do something like that?
We don't want old-fashioned nationalisation.
Well, we don't.
We're certainly looking at all options.
All right, hold on.
Surely the most important thing is that we stabilise the company now. We get enough time to be able to get a proper package in. And I'd just say one thing to Anna. I was delighted what you said about trade unions. I just wish you would now withdraw the trade union bill, which is attacking trade unions.
You can't help yourself, can you? Well, you always have to make a tribal
because
point.
the trade unions are vital to making sure that British steel works.
Tribalism in Westminster politics and between your party and his is something we're quite used to on this programme. It does, however, sadly bring us to the end of this programme because our time's up.